In the quiet coastal town of Safety Harbor, Florida, life moved at a peaceful rhythm. On a cold night in January 2004, that peace was shattered. A devoted mother of two, Niccole Halpin, was brutally attacked inside her own home, while her terrified children hid just a few feet away, and she was on call with her boyfriend. And the only clue to the killer's identity came from a faint voice, captured over the phone line. To understand what happened that night, we need to go back to the life of Nikki Halpin. Niccole Halpin, known to friends and family simply as Nikki, was a 33-year-old mother raising two young sons, ages 7 and 9. She lived in a modest home on 4th Street North in Safety Harbor, a close-knit neighborhood surrounded by oak trees and Gulf breezes. Nikki had gone through her share of struggles. After her divorce, she worked hard to provide stability for her boys. Friends described her as strong, independent, and deeply protective of her children. She worked full-time, often juggling long hours, but never missed a soccer game or a school event. Her co-workers recalled that she carried herself with quiet confidence, a woman rebuilding her life after heartbreak, piece by piece. By late 2003, things were looking up. She had started dating again, a kind-hearted man named Chris, who seemed to truly care for her and her kids. Together, they shared simple dinners and movie nights. For the first time in a while, Nikki felt safe. But in the background, another man still lingered, a ghost from her past who couldn't let go. Before Chris entered her life, Nikki had been in a 2-year relationship with a man named Daniel Welch. At first, their connection seemed genuine. Daniel was charming, helpful, and attentive. But as time passed, Nikki began noticing another side of him. He was possessive, controlling. He didn't like when she went out with friends or when she didn't answer the phone right away. When Nikki finally ended the relationship, Daniel refused to accept it. He called her repeatedly, showed up unannounced, and even tried to talk his way back into her life, using the children as an excuse. Friends urged Nikki to change her locks and stay alert. She did, but Daniel had once been trusted. He'd been inside that home countless times, and somehow, even after the breakup, he still had a key. That evening began like any other. Nikki had taken her 2 boys out to dinner with her new boyfriend Chris. It was a Thursday, quiet, uneventful. After dinner, around 9 p.m., they returned to Nikki's home. Chris stayed only for a short while, chatting with the kids before heading out for the night. Moments later, Nikki called him again. Her voice was uneasy. She thought she heard something, a noise coming from inside the house. Chris stayed on the phone, listening as Nikki walked through her living room. Then came the moment that would haunt everyone who heard that call. Through the phone line, Chris suddenly heard a thud, followed by Nikki's scream. He shouted her name, but she didn't respond. On the other end, the chaos unfolded in seconds. Nikki had come face to face with an intruder. Her sons, frightened by the noise, ran to the bathroom and hid in the bathtub, clutching each other as the sounds of struggle echoed down the hallway. Chris, still connected to the call, heard something chilling. A man's voice, calm, commanding, saying the words, "Niccole, calm down." Then, silence. Chris immediately dialed 911 and rushed to Nikki's house. When police arrived, they found the front door slightly ajar. Inside, the scene was devastating. Nikki was lying in her bedroom unconscious, surrounded by signs of a violent struggle. She had been beaten severely with a blunt object, likely a bat or similar weapon. Her children, still hiding in the bathroom, were trembling and crying. paramedics rushed her to Bayfront Medical Center. For 4 long days, doctors fought to save her life, but the injuries were too severe. On January 11th, 2004, Niccole Halpin was pronounced dead, the victim of a brutal attack inside her own home. Her death shook the Safety Harbor community to its core. A mother gone, 2 children left traumatized, and no suspect in custody. From the very beginning, investigators noticed something strange. There were no signs of forced entry. The doors and windows were intact. Nothing valuable appeared stolen. This wasn't a burglary gone wrong. It was something personal. Detectives began piecing together Nikki's final moments, reviewing the 911 recordings and statements from her boyfriend and neighbors. Then, they turned their attention to the most haunting clue of all, the voice that Chris had heard on the phone. He told police that right before the call went dead, he heard a man say, "Niccole, calm down." Investigators replayed the audio multiple times, though faint. The male voice was clear enough for comparison. When they brought the recording to Nikki's friends and family, one person recognized it immediately. It was Daniel Welch. Daniel Welch was no stranger to law enforcement. He had prior run-ins for minor offenses and was known for his temper. When detectives brought him in for questioning, his demeanor was cold and distant. He denied everything, said he hadn't spoken to Nikki in weeks and had been home that night. But the timeline didn't add up. Phone records, witness statements, and even his own inconsistencies began to unravel his story. Then came the testimony from Daniel's new girlfriend. She told police that on the night of January 8, Daniel left their home unexpectedly. He was gone for over an hour, and when he returned, he was sweating, nervous, and agitated. She also noticed something odd: a black ski mask lying on the seat of his car. When detectives searched his belongings, they found items linking him to Nikki's home and a set of keys that fit her door. It became clear Daniel hadn't broken in, he had walked in. Even with strong suspicions, investigators needed airtight evidence before making an arrest. For months, they meticulously built their case. The recorded voice analysis matched Daniel's speech patterns. The key connected him to the crime scene, and Nikki's phone records placed him within proximity that night. Still, Daniel maintained his innocence. He portrayed himself as the victim of a witch hunt, a man unfairly blamed for his ex-girlfriend's death. But the evidence was mounting, and soon, the walls began to close in. By mid-2005, a grand jury was ready to hear the case. Witness after witness described Daniel's jealousy, his obsessive behavior, and the months of harassment Nikki endured before her death. The story painted a chilling picture of a man who couldn't let go and a woman who tried to move on. As prosecutors prepared to charge him, Daniel made a desperate move, one that would seal his fate once and for all. It was the decision that would seal Daniel Welch's fate once and for all. After more than a year of denying involvement, Daniel found himself cornered by mounting evidence. His friends were turning away. His alibis had crumbled. Even his own family began to question the man they thought they knew. But in the eyes of investigators, there was still one missing piece: a confession. Detectives intensified their interviews. Each session was calm, deliberate, and filled with long silences. They let the weight of the evidence speak louder than any accusation. Photos of Nikki's home were spread across the table. Images of the living room, the hallway, the bedroom. A quiet reminder of what Daniel had taken. When detectives played the 911 recording, the faint voice saying, "Niccole, calm down," Daniel flinched. His jaw tightened, his eyes narrowed, but his words failed him. He asked to hear it again, and again. By the third playback, the silence in that room was deafening. Then he whispered, "That doesn't prove anything." But it did. It proved he recognized his own voice. From that moment, his resolve began to crack. Investigators learned that Daniel had kept close tabs on Nikki for months after their breakup. Phone records showed dozens of late-night calls. Neighbors reported seeing his truck parked down the street. And in his apartment, police discovered a notebook, pages filled with obsessive notes about Nikki's new relationship. He had written her name over and over again, as if trying to convince himself she still belonged to him. One entry stood out: "If I can't make her listen, maybe she'll understand another way." To detectives, that line read like a confession in ink. Still, prosecutors wanted an official statement. They knew a guilty plea would spare Nikki's children from reliving the trauma in court. So they waited. In May 2007, after more than 3 years of silence, Daniel Welch finally stood before a judge in the Pinellas County Courthouse. The courtroom was small and quiet. Nikki's family sat together in the front row: her parents, her sister, and her 2 boys, now older but still carrying the weight of that night. When asked how he would plead to the charge of second-degree murder and burglary, Daniel's voice barely rose above a whisper. Guilty. A single word, but it carried the power of everything he had destroyed. Under the plea deal, Daniel was sentenced to 25 years in prison, followed by a lifetime of supervision. It wasn't the maximum sentence possible, but for Nikki's family, it was a measure of justice and an end to years of waiting. For Nikki's loved ones, justice did not erase the pain. It couldn't bring back the mother, the daughter, or the friend they had lost. Her parents spoke quietly to reporters outside the courthouse. Her mother said, "We finally have peace, but we'll never have our girl back." Inside the courtroom, her sons sat silently, clutching each other's hands. They were old enough to understand what the word guilty meant and what it didn't. They had survived a night that would shape their lives forever. Counselors later said the boys often spoke of their mother's bravery, how she had tried to protect them, even in her final moments. Safety Harbor was a town unaccustomed to tragedy. For months after the murder, neighbors left candles and flowers along Nikki's driveway. The community rallied around her children, organizing fundraisers and scholarships in her name. Her story became a reminder that violence doesn't always come from strangers lurking in the dark. Sometimes it comes from someone once trusted. Local law enforcement began new outreach programs focused on domestic violence and stalking prevention. Officers said Nikki's case changed how they handled harassment complaints, taking them more seriously, knowing how quickly they could escalate. Even years later, residents still remembered that night. They remembered the sound of sirens cutting through the still air and the way the town never quite felt the same again. Daniel Welch was transferred to a state correctional facility in northern Florida. There, he lived out his days far from the world he once controlled. Inmates who knew him described a man withdrawn, mostly quiet, who rarely spoke about his crime. Some said he kept a small photo of Nikki's sons, a haunting reminder of what his rage had cost. He never appealed his sentence. Perhaps even he knew that no court could overturn the truth. The justice system had done its part, but for everyone else involved, the healing was only beginning. As the years passed, Nikki's sons grew up surrounded by the love of grandparents, relatives, and a supportive community. They rarely spoke publicly about the night that changed everything. But friends who knew them said their strength came from their mother, that her courage had become part of who they were. Niccole Halpin was more than a case file. Her final act wasn't one of fear, but of courage, shielding her sons from the violence closing in. Justice has long since been served. The lesson of Niccole Halpin's story remains timeless. that love is not possession, that control is not devotion, and that silence, no matter how faint, can sometimes be the loudest cry for help. This was the story of Niccole, Nikki Halpin, the voice on the line. A story of loss, courage, and a community forever changed. May her memory remind us that even in the quietest towns, danger can hide behind familiar doors, and that every voice deserves to be heard before it's too late. If this case moved you, please like the video. And if you want to see more true crime cases like this, make sure you subscribe our channel. See you in the next video.